Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. I hope everybody had a wonderful new year. I have a strong feeling that 2026 is going to be much better than 2025. It seems all of my friends had a very difficult 2025. Don't know why. I know it was the case for me. Everyone seems to be dealing with family issues and illnesses and all kinds of problems. 2025 was a tough year for a lot of people. And I just have a feeling that 2026 is going to be a much better year, and God willing, it will be. So here are my best wishes for the happiest Happy New Year possible. I know, the streets are full of people today celebrating being liberated in Venezuela. Certainly the people of Venezuela are going to have a much better New Year. Say some prayers for the people in Iran, that they will finally be able to liberate themselves from the Islamic regime that has been horribly, horribly oppressive. Iran was once just an incredible nation. I mean, it's Persia. It's one of the oldest cultures on the face of the earth, one of the oldest peoples on the face of the earth, known for art and science and just incredible. At one point, you go back a couple thousand years ago, Persia was one of the three most powerful nations in the world. I mean, it was Rome and Greece and Persia. And they were always at odds. I mean, it's not exactly cultures that tend to get along all that well. But for good several hundred years there, a good 1,000 years in between, Persia, Iran, if you want to call it that, was the most Western of all Islamic nations. Very peaceful, very modern. If you go back and look at the pictures before the Islamic Revolution in the 70s, women were in modern dress, employed. Education was prioritized. People were very prosperous. It was one of the world's leading powers. And then after the Islamic Revolution, people were essentially just chained. I mean, forced to live and work and do things in ways that were foreign to that culture for most of its existence, and set back really hundreds of years in terms of prosperity and technology and freedom. Now, really, we're talking about human rights and freedom. The Islamic government of Iran has been the leading proponent in the entire world for oppression and actual slavery and really, really bad stuff, torture and killing and terrorism and all that. So you know, as a Catholic, I have very little in common with Muslims in Iran, but I pray for them every single day because everybody's made in God's image. Everybody deserves basic human rights, and along with those, part of those human rights are freedom of thought and belief and religion and association and the ability to use the gifts we're given, to use those talents. And yeah, they've had a real bad go of it for my entire life. You know, I mean, I was literally born as the Islamic Revolution was taking place. So in my lifetime, I have never known a free and prosperous Iran. Have known many people from South America, from Chile, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, certainly other nations of South America that went through their own communist revolutions and went from being prosperous and happy and everybody doing really well and upwardly mobile and each generation doing a little better than the generation before. The communists come in, take over, and, you know, the economy grinds to a halt. Corruption runs rampant. People are eating out of dumpsters and being shot in the streets. That's the history of communism. It has been from the very day one, from the late 1800s to now. That is the history of communism. If you were to look back in history, you will find, okay, you can go to archive.org right now. If you don't have a copy or you can't get to a library or you don't want to order it off of Amazon or whatever, go to archive.org, pull up the big black book of communism, and it documents more than 200,000, more than 200 million. Boy, did I underestimate. More than 200 million people killed by communist and socialist governments. And I'm not talking in wars. This is leaving out the wars. This is not, World War I and World War II and, the Vietnam War and the Korean War and all that. This is communist and socialist governments killing their own people. I believe it was Mao who, when asked about purposefully killing 30 million Chinese citizens, said that they would just fertilize the soil. That is the history of communism. And for some reason, the people of New York just elected a communist governor. And good luck, New York. Good luck. I'm afraid you're going to get what you deserve. You're going to get what you voted for. That is the worst curse of, I guess you would say, of the Christian world. It says in the Bible that God gave people up to their own devices. When people have gone so wrong and so bad, just walk away and let them have what they want. And it's happening in California. We've seen it. It's happening in New York. And all I can say to the good people in New York, I've had so many excellent friends that are native-born, multi-generational New Yorkers. I'm talking old family Yankees from upstate New York. I'm talking the children of Irish and Italian immigrants that came in around 1900. The best people. Honestly, really some of my best friends have been New Yorkers. And my advice, move to New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Flip those states. Get the heck out of New York. The governor's no better than the mayor. Just my 2 cents, just my soapbox. I am going to say, please don't come to North Carolina or South Carolina or Tennessee. We've got enough Yankees in the South. Yes, I appreciate your food and culture. And heck, if it wasn't for all the Yankees that have moved into North Carolina over the past 20 years, North Carolina would still be run by the Democrat Party, which the enforcement arm of which was the Ku Klux Klan, still is the Ku Klux Klan in some areas. When I was growing up as a kid, we had these billboards on the interstate, and especially in Scotland County, but I remember like around Benson, just coming into North Carolina, Rocky Mount, big billboards that say the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and the Democrat Party of North Carolina welcomes you. Please obey our laws. These were not welcoming signs, okay? These were Klansmen in full regalia, their white robes and pointy hats, riding horses with a St. Andrew's cross and a burning torch. They were warning you, North Carolina is a Democrat Ku Klux Klan, Masonic Order run state. Catholics are not welcome here. Jews are not welcome here. Republicans are not welcome here. It's really been all the Yankees that have moved in, especially in eastern North Carolina, that has flipped this state red for the most part and made it a place where it's okay to be Catholic, where we don't have to worry about having our house burned down in the middle of the night or being lynched, which was the case even in the 1980s. So I do appreciate that aspect of immigration to our great state. But when you come in, and this is true for anywhere, I don't care if you're moving to another country or another state, you left where you came from for a reason. Don't try to turn where you got to. Don't try to make it like where you came from. You know, we can look here in North Carolina, Asheville, Chapel Hill, Charlotte, several other cities. Winston-Salem, Greensboro, Greenville, Wilmington, where so many people have come in from the outside, and what do? First thing they do is start voting Democrat and raising taxes, defunding the police, everything they tried to get away from. They then try to turn the state they moved to, because it was better, into that. We don't want that. We don't want that, and we don't like that. So I would recommend, I'm going to ask you, before you decide to move to North Carolina, because we're full, trust me, we're full. South Carolina's full. Tennessee's full. We're full. We got all the, new immigrants we can handle. And I mean, you want to see what's happening in Tennessee, just look at the city government of Nashville. It's basically being turned into like San Francisco. I mean, we don't want that. There's a reason we fought a war. We wanted to keep y'all out of here. That was the bottom line. It wasn't about slavery. It was, we want to keep y'all out of here. We want to be our culture, our people, our way of life. Doesn't have a thing to do with race. Doesn't have a thing to do with anything. Unfortunately, at that time, yes, there was a very strong anti-Catholic bias. There's no doubt about that. There's no getting around that. North Carolina was actually much more welcoming to Jews than it was Catholics, by the way. There's some of the oldest synagogues in the South in North Carolina. It was illegal to be Catholic in North Carolina until right around the time of the Civil War. And then Sherman burned the first Catholic church. So, I mean, the Yankees were not anywhere more welcoming, in any way more welcoming to Catholics than were the South. That only changed up north with the influx of immigration in around 1900. But before you decide to come here, and like I said, you're welcome to come here as long as you embrace our culture as opposed to try to impose your culture on us. Do consider New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Go there and try to flip it red, try to lower the taxes in those states, try to put a conservative government in those states. You'll do a lot more good, and you'll probably be a lot happier. Because I know you don't like our barbecue. I don't know why, but y'all got a weird idea of barbecue, and all you do is complain about it. No, it's not so much a matter of we have a problem with Yankees as it is people who come in from the north and assume that people from the south are ignorant. One, they've been taught a false version of history. They've been taught the lies and myths about Lincoln and the Civil War and all that, which are completely false. And I've talked many times about this. Lincoln had no desire to free the slaves. He only wanted to preserve the Union. He actually allowed his generals to keep their slaves. I mean, it was a last-ditch effort to preserve the Union. Meanwhile, people in the South said, well, my grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence saying we could secede from England, therefore we can secede from the United States of America and form our own nation. That's our God-given right. And any honest person would look at it and say, yes, that if you want to live by the principles of the Declaration of Independence, it is your God-given right to secede and form a more perfect union. But, of course, they were taught that the South was ignorant, the South was evil and all that. And then they get here and we talk slowly. Unless you're from Atlanta. People in Atlanta talk real fast. But anyway, we talk slowly. And they think because we talk slowly, we must be stupid. You know what? You have no idea a person's intellect by their speech. I have known people who were from very rural areas who spoke remarkably different dialects than are common in the United States, who had IQs well over 150 and were brilliant people and could do just about anything. But somebody comes in and they hear someone talking slowly and they think, oh, that's just an ignorant hick. Well, if that's your attitude, please go to New Jersey. All right, now let's get on with the herbs. And I know, I read the comments. Sometimes y'all get really upset when I make political or cultural statements and just talk about the plants. You know what? It's my show. You don't like it? Get the hell out of here. That's the bottom line. Anyway, I always remember, y'all, I appreciate your listening. I appreciate you buying my books. I actually say prayers for you every day because your support for my podcast, for my newsletter, buying my books, etc., enables me to live the life I like to live. I get to spend my time learning and talking about plants and roaming the woods and foraging and doing the things I enjoy because of your support, and I appreciate every one of you, even if you're a Yankee, and even if for some unknown reason you think Abraham Lincoln was some kind of saint. A little research into his life would show you very differently. But of course, you're not taught that in school. What you're taught in school is America's always right. Unfortunately, and I know this is going to upset a lot of people that may have agreed with every other one of my statements, America's not always right. Sometimes we get involved in wars that we have no business being involved in. And sometimes we do bad stuff. What's bad stuff? Well, bad stuff might be creating something like Lyme disease in a bioweapons lab. It's now, I stated that one of my first episodes, we were talking about the Wuhan virus, the COVID, and I said, it looks to me like it came from a weapons lab in China, and I don't mean this to be a racial statement because we've done the same thing in America. Just look at Lyme disease. They had the idea of infecting ticks with some uncurable disease and dropping them on Russia. It got out, and now we have Lyme disease in the United States, thanks to an American bioweapons lab. People are like, wow, I've never heard this. This is crazy. Well, I took it for granted that everybody knew that. Turns out they didn't. It was actually one of the most controversial statements I've ever made. I first learned about it in the 90s in a book written by a former intelligence officer. I then went and spoke when I lived in Georgia with a naval intelligence officer, retired, who had been very much part of such programs, and he told me 100%, yes, Lyme disease began in an American bioweapons lab. This is a man-made virus. That's why it's so hard to treat. Recently, in just recent weeks, thanks to RFK Jr., those files have begun to be declassified, and people are beginning to admit that, yeah, American scientists who really, not all of them were American, some of them were actually German Nazi scientists. In the fall of Germany in World War II, America was actually very careful to get the scientists out of there and put them to work for us. That is immoral. I'm sorry, that is immoral. I can say that America was absolutely wrong in utilizing bioweapons. The experiments, the horrible experiments that we've all heard about in Germany, well, we just took them over here and put them on our payroll. And yeah, I'll say that's absolutely wrong. But what are you going to do? No human being, people were born with original sin. People were born with what we Catholics call concupiscence, which means we're more likely to do bad than good. We're more attracted to what's wrong than what is right. It's fallen human nature. It's every people on earth has practiced slavery. In every tribe, every region, every corner of the earth. Every people on earth has committed genocide, unjust wars, atrocities. Every people on earth has had murderers and rapists, etc. Every person on earth has the potential to be equally bad or equally good. We're not special just because we live on this continent, in this hemisphere. I'm sorry, it's not. America, it's attributed to de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville was a French political philosopher, etc., that wrote about democracy in America. And it's said that this quote is misappropriated to him, that someone else actually said it. I was taught it was de Tocqueville. Doesn't really matter because, I mean, he said things like democracy can exist only until the people realize they can vote themselves money from the Treasury, which is why you got people like Mondami in New York or Newsom in California, etc. He said that America is great because America is good, and when America ceases to be good, she shall cease to be great. Now, whether he actually said that or not, I'm not sure. I'm sure he said a lot of things very similar to that. I know Thomas Jefferson said the Constitution was written for a moral Christian people and would only work for a moral Christian people. It's the same theme, whether he said it or not, but sometimes we're not good. You can look at the history of how Native Americans were treated in the United States. You can certainly look at slavery, which was certainly practiced both in the South and the North, believe it or not. I mean, how many people learn in history class in elementary school or high school that when the Civil War started, the population of Manhattan rioted because everything against the Union. They rioted against Lincoln because they depended so much on slavery for what they had. They were afraid of having their markets disrupted. Nobody on either side was innocent in that regard by any means. I mean, you can look at the Dutch West India Company, East India, whatever. You can look at the trade. Boston, the entire Massachusetts economy was essentially they had fishing, they had fur, and they had molasses. Where did they get molasses? They got molasses from British-owned slaves in the Caribbean. They harvested the sugar. The sugar went to Boston. There it was turned into molasses. It went back to England. England took the money from the molasses to buy more slaves to ship them to the Caribbean. Anybody who thinks the South was all about slavery and the North was all about abolition is nuts. Nuts. In fact, or misinformed, ignorant, I'll say that. I mean, Robert E. Lee was himself opposed to slavery. It didn't mean he was willing to let the North invade his state of Virginia and burn everybody's homes and kill every man, woman, and child. Not at all. He was asked by Lincoln to be the head of the Union Army, and he said, no, my loyalty is first to my home state and the people of that state. Most people in the South, actually only about, if I remember correctly, 7 or 17%, I can't remember, actually owned slaves. Most people fought because they were being invaded by the North. That's the bottom line. And down in South Carolina, they said, we secede, we're done, we're out of here. The North invaded, and suddenly people were being shot at and their homes burned. And that's the truth of the war, but people don't want to talk about that. Now let's talk about a very southern plant. A plant very much associated with South Carolina, in fact. And it is one of my favorite herbs, bar none. This is jessamine. It's pronounced jessamine. The Latin name is Gelsemium, Gelsemium, also known as jessamine. And Carolina jessamine is the state flower of South Carolina. It is beautiful. There are 2 varieties native to my region, swamp jessamine, which is all over the eastern part of the state, and just Gelsemium sempervivens, or Carolina jessamine, which is everywhere else. It will grow up into the mountains. It grows all over the sand hills. It grows throughout the central part of the state. It is everywhere. You've probably seen this plant before, and you probably mistook it to be a version of, or a variety, I should say, of honeysuckle. That is a deadly mistake. First of all, Gelsemium, or jessamine, is one of the most toxic plants known to man. Probably one of the most common poisonings annually by wild plants, native plants, in fact. People mistake it for honeysuckle, even though it does not have the honeysuckle smell, and either try to suck the nectar out of the flower or eat the flower, and you can even die. Okay, that could even, depending on how much you consume and how large a person you are, children often get poisoned by jessamine. You need to learn this plant, and you need to teach your kids. This is not honeysuckle. It has a more vibrantly yellow flower, a darker yellow. It's more of a saffron color. The flower is larger than honeysuckle. Of course, honeysuckle can be pale yellow, kind of white. You get white honeysuckle flowers, or even sort of a larger reddish, purpley type of honeysuckle flower. This is going to be a deep, almost saffron yellow. And the leaf is slightly different. One is more narrow, the other is more obovate, but they grow in the same patterns. They have the same type vines. You need to identify your jessamine when it is in flower, or learn to tell the difference between the leaves. Now, why am I telling you about this plant? Well, it is one of the plants with the greatest potential to absolutely overturn the pharmaceutical industry. For the past, 30, 40 years now, we have had an epidemic of opioid abuse. We went from having just plain old morphine, codeine, and its variants, your Tylenol with codeine and morphine and all that. That was what people, I'm not going to get into the different pharmaceutical names, but you know what I'm talking about. That's what people use from, morphine goes back to before the Civil War. That's what people use for intense pain. They came out with OxyContin and such related pills, including fentanyl. Began coming out with these in the 80s and 90s. By the 90s, we had an epidemic. Doctors were pushing them. People have actually been tried and found guilty for overprescribing this. We created a huge epidemic of opioid addiction in the United States. Has destroyed families, destroyed entire communities. J.D. Vance's whole life story is essentially based on his mother's OxyContin addiction. This has been really bad stuff, and I'm certainly everybody knows about it. We're losing about 100,000 people a year to opiate abuse, and especially the fentanyl that's been coming in, mainly from China through Mexico. Bad stuff. Really, really bad stuff, right? There is one plant that has the physical effects so close to an opioid medication that it could replace all those drugs, and it's jessamine, Gelsemium. It has the almost identical effect on the central nervous system. It relaxes, slows respiration, deadens pain, induces sleep. There have been no, to my knowledge, clinical studies showing any chemically addictive properties. So why aren't people using this? That would just blow everybody away, right? Well, one, it's very toxic. It's very dangerous. This is an herb that if you use, you have to study it and learn about it. You have to become an absolute expert in it, and you're going to make a tincture out of it. Be even better if you made a percolation, because you can really know exactly how strong each drop is. And the strength of the plant can vary depending on where and how it has grown, the nutrients of the soil, how much water it's gotten. It has to be very controlled. And then it can basically replace any opioid drug. And this would absolutely turn the pharmaceutical world on its head. Why it's not being researched in labs by pharmaceutical companies, I can only speculate that, as I always say, there's no money in using the herbs that grow naturally all around us. So with that caveat, I'm going to say I am recommending you don't use this herb because it's very, very dangerous. That said, I do use this herb. As you know, I have had severe back injuries. I was paralyzed for almost 2 years. I actually had a brief dependency on opioid medications. Withdrawal was hellacious. I have not touched them since, and I will not touch them. You know how I deal with back pain? Hempvana. Yeah, it's a commercial product. There are many that are similar to it. It's a hemp oil product. It works for me better than the pills I used to take. Now, you can't get a topical application like that for, say, a bad toothache. Last year, you may remember in the spring, I broke a tooth. Before I could get anything done about it, it became severely infected, way down the root. I mean, big abscess, intense dental pain. I went outside, I dug up a couple of Gelsemium roots, and I used that for pain, and it worked. Again, I am not recommending that. As I've said, I am reckless with my own health. I am not recommending you be reckless with your health. I would not recommend you ever touch this plant. I mean, you would touch it. I'd never take it internally unless you know everything about this plant and how to use it. And even then, I'm going to recommend you not use it because it could kill you. That said, I use it. Okay? So, Miss Grieve tells us that Gelsemium is one of the most beautiful North American plants. Absolutely, and it is. She says it grows from Florida through the Virginias, well down into Mexico. I'll take her word for it. She said the important drug Gelsemium, official in the principal pharmacopoeias, is composed of the dried rhizome, that's basically the root hairs, essentially, of Gelsemium nitidum, which was discovered by André Michaud. Michaud was the botanist who basically explored my backyard. I mean, literally, he came up to Grandfather Mountain. Every square inch of my backyard, the trails that run up to the top of the mountain, was where Michaud did his research. We have so many plants named after him in North Carolina. It's a climbing plant. It's vining. She says it's also called yellow jasmine or Carolina jasmine. It's not a jasmine. It's jessamine is actually the way it should be pronounced. She describes it. I'm not going to we've already done that. The stem runs underground a considerable distance. That's true. And it puts out these root hairs or rhizomes. That's what we use. Carefully harvested and dried. She said the plant was first described in 1640 by John Parkinson, who grew it in his garden from seeds sent to him from Virginia. Let's see, she keeps describing the plant. We don't need to do more of that. She said the drug is in the hard, woody fibers. She talks about how to collect it and dry it. Pretty similar, actually. I mean, pretty obvious, actually. Gelsemium is a yellowish bitter and poisonous amorphous alkaloid that is found in there. And it's soluble either in alcohol or amorphous salts. It was first discovered in a tea form, but it is normally used as a tincture. She says the alkaloid is colorless, odorless, intensely bitter. It is. If you taste it, it actually has what I would call a narcotic taste. Poisoning by Gelsemium. The drug is a powerful spinal depressant. Its most marked action being on the anterior and cornice of gray matter in the spinal cord. The drug kills by its action on the respiratory center of the medulla oblongata. Shortly after administration of even a moderate dose, respiration is slowed and ultimately arrested, this being the cause of death. In other words, you can overdose from this the same as you could from an opioid. It works the same way. Beginning with sensation of languor, relaxation, muscular weakness, followed by paralysis if the dose is sufficiently large. The face becomes anxious, the temperature subnormal, the skin cold and clammy, the pulse rapid and feeble, drooping of the upper eyelid and the lower jaw, double vision, dilation of the pupil are prominent symptoms. Respiration becomes slow and feeble, shallow and irregular. Death occurs from centric respiratory failure, the heart stopping almost simultaneously with the breathing. Yes, very important. So I am not minimizing this in any way, shape, or form. She says under medicinal actions, it uses antispasmodic, sedative, febrifusion, diaphoretic. So antispasmodic, it helps with muscle cramping. Sedative, obviously. Febrifusion, diaphoretic means it can actually help break a fever. Medicinal history of the plant is quite modern. It is stated to have been brought into notice by a Mississippi planter for whom in his illness the root was gathered by mistake for that of another plant. After partaking of an infusion, a tea essentially, Serious symptoms arose, but when, contrary to expectations, he recovered, it was clear that the attack of bilious fever for which he had been suffering had disappeared. It broke his fever. This accidental error led to the preparation of the plant of a proprietary nostrum called the electric febrifuge. Seriously, that was the name of it. This was actually called the electric febrifuge in 1849 by Dr. Porcher of South Carolina. Dr. Porcher was a very famous physician at the time. In America, it was formerly used extensively as an arterial sedative and febrifuge in various fevers, most especially in those of intermittent character, which is usually be malaria. It has been recommended and found useful in treatment of spasmodic disorders such as asthma and whooping cough, spasmodic cough, and other conditions depending upon localized muscular spasms. In convulsions, its effect has been found satisfactory. At present, it is mainly used in the treatment of neuralgic pain, especially those involving the facial nerves, particularly when arising from decaying teeth. See, I knew this, that's why I used it, and yes, it did actually work. She said we would hold it in the cheek, and that's actually what I did. I took the little root hairs, and I just kind of chewed them up and held them in the cheek by the tooth until everything settled down. And I was able to get through a few more weeks till I could see a dentist, and he pulled the tooth because it was in really bad shape. It had been in worse shape than I realized. It was used in rheumatism and pleurisy, pneumonia, bronchitis, etc. Also used for retention of urine. Now that's very important. If you have had much experience with codeine, morphine, and all that, you know it can actually paralyze the bladder. When that happens, you can't pee. That can actually be very, very dangerous. It's incredibly uncomfortable. It's a side effect that not everybody experiences. This, having the same effects as the opiate, can actually relieve retention of urine. So that's another reason that really doctors ought to be looking into this herb. And again, why they're not, I can only assume it's because of profit motive or ignorance or both. So the Lumbee Indians had a longer use of jessamine, obviously it being a plant native to the Americas. They mention in a Lumbee herbal that the bright yellow flowers are beautiful, but it is a poisonous and comparable in toxicity to poison hemlock. So keep that in mind. Lumbee healers made a medicine tea for jaundice by boiling 30 milligrams of dried root and rhizome in 4 pints of water. The tribes used the root tea as a sedative, painkiller, antispasmodic, and fever-reducing agent. Native peoples also used this plant in the treatment of asthma and whooping cough. Resources of Southern Fields and Forests gives the full story of the man who fell ill of a fever, sent someone out to get a root of one plant that came back with the wrong plant, made a tea. Apparently, he drank a certain amount of it, and doesn't say how much. Got drowsy, passed out, lay on the floor in a catatonic state for quite a while. Well over 24 hours. Doctors came, they thought he was dying, they gave him quinine, they gave him an emetic, tried to make him throw up. Eventually, the drug of the plant wore off. He came to and said he had a very pleasant experience, relaxed, free from pain. Never mind, he almost died. So we want to be very, 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 very careful with this. But in 1867, it was researched in Brazil. Doctor in 1868 says, I used the Gelsemium form in tincture very much as a sedative for an excited nervous system, for relief of neuralgia, etc. Interestingly, though, he was also used as a poultice and applied warm to acute painful swellings for neuralgia, rheumatic toothache. So it can be used topically, which would likely be far, far less dangerous. King's Medical Dispensatory of 1898 describes the plant. It was still very much in use. It says Gelsemium is one of our best remedies. Yeah. I mean, in 1898, it was very well known by doctors. In fact, they describe it, they give a lot of history of use, a lot of anecdotes from different doctors at the time, pharmaceutical journal entries and such. They get into the chemical composition, which I will skip because it's quite complex. Let's see if I can get to uses. Boy, they went page after page on this. Okay, so action, medicinal uses, and dosages. Gelsemium powerfully impresses the nervous system, though in man it never produces convulsions. Convulsions may occur in lower animals. It's actually anticonvulsive in humans. In some animals, it can cause convulsions. It relaxes, doses relax the muscles, especially the, etc. Okay, allays nervous irritation, gives a pleasant, languid sense of ease and relaxation, accompanied larger doses will cause the jaw to drop, difficulty in managing the eyelids. That's, you've had too much, okay? Continued administration, it affects the brain, spinal centers, causing marked feebleness and muscular movements, confusion of vision and vertigo. Large doses paralyze the spinal cord, cause almost complete loss of muscular power. Reflex action is depressed with the loss of muscular power, and the lack of sensibility, which usually takes place, are due to its actions upon the spinal marrow. Consciousness may be lost, but is usually retained, even when toxic doses have been taken. When fatal, however, dissolution is usually preceded by loss of consciousness. Characteristic toxic symptoms we already mentioned. It's essentially just like an opioid overdose. Gelsemium is said to increase the power of strychnine. So another reason you might want to be very careful with that. Okay, they used, in poisonings by Gelsemium or its alkaloid Gelsemium, evacuate the stomach by emetics or stomach pump. Administer hypodermically morphine and atropine. So apparently Gelsemium and morphine are almost opposed to each other. You could actually use morphine and atropine to treat Gelsemium poisoning, although I obviously would not recommend even experimenting with it to that point. Use friction, internal stimulation, hot drinks, external heat, etc. Therapeutically, it works on the spinal nerve centers, diminishing the blood supply to them, preventing spasmodic action. I think we've really covered just about everything in that category. It helps allay nervous excitement, good for fevers, we got all that. It is a bitter and can be good for the liver. This is interesting. In 1898, it said in pelvic disorders of women, that's menstrual issues, it is a favorite remedy. When the usual indications, it subdues ovaritis, metritis, and I'm not familiar with this one, sapingitis, salpingistis. Severe dysmenorrhea with colicky pains, uterine colic are promptly relieved by dosages of it. Rigid uteri with thin, unyielding edges and dryness of the parts is relaxed by Gelsemium. So again, it was much used in the 1800s. 1898, we can assume well into the early 1900s, and then just like erased from the books. Now more modern use. Plants for Future says medicinal use of Gelsemium sempervivens. The roots are analgesic, antispasmodic, diaphoretic, febrifuge, hypnotic, midratic, nervine sedative, and vasodilator, a powerful depressant of the central nervous system, deadening pain and reducing spasms. It is said to suspend and hold in check muscular irritability and nervous excitement with more force and power than any known remedy. While it relaxes the muscles, it also relieves all sense of pain. It is used internally in the treatment of neuralgia, migraine, sciatica, toothache, severe pain, especially in the terminal illnesses or accidents, especially in terminal illnesses or accidents, and meningitis. Externally, it has been used as a folk remedy for cancer. The root is best harvested in the autumn, dried carefully for later use. Extreme care is advised with the use of this plant. It should only be used under the supervision of a qualified practitioner. Excessive doses cause respiratory depression, giddiness, double vision, and death. It should not be prescribed for patients with heart disease, hypertension, hypotension, low blood pressure, of course. or Myasthenia gravis. Yeah. The fresh root is used in homeopathy, used in the treatment of a variety of complaints, including fevers, flus, and headaches. Known hazards: all parts of the plant contain toxic alkaloids. Eating just one flower has reportedly been lethal to children. The plant can also cause skin allergies, etc. Peterson Field Guide for Central and Eastern Medicinal Plants says root preparations were once used as a powerful CNS depressant, deadening pain, reducing spasms, externally a folk cancer remedy. Warning: deadly poison. Eating a single flower has caused death. Okay. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up there. Now, I am leaving you with the warning of don't use this plant. That said, I use this plant. In fact, I grow it in pots. I have went out and collected wild Gelsemium vines. I cultivate them, and I keep them on hand for when needed. I am not going to recommend you do the same, obviously. I am going to recommend that doctors and pharmacists and pharmaceutical companies and scientists and chemists and all that begin researching this plant, because it could literally put an end to the opioid epidemic. I mean, you know, I'm a musician. I've known many musicians. I've known some people that had some real problems. Okay, I've known people that had to go through treatment programs and such. A lot of heroin addicts and such get put on. Oh gosh, what is the name of that drug? It's essentially a substitute for heroin. It works very similarly, but it can help wean them off of heroin. Methadone. I've known people who were on so much methadone that their skin turned green. Honestly, I cannot say that I have ever known someone who was cured of their heroin addiction by using methadone. What if doctors had a Gelsemium-based pharmaceutical that they could use that would actually wean people off of strong opioid narcotics or prescription narcotics, that was not addictive, that didn't have all those side effects? Yeah, the dose would have to be very highly regulated and monitored. They'd have to figure out a way to make sure the potency of each batch was the same. And no, there probably wouldn't be much of a profit margin in it whatsoever. It's essentially free. And think about how many millions of lives it could save. If doctors and pharmaceutical researchers actually want to help people and do good, wouldn't you think this would be something they'd look into? I'm just saying. So, if you're listening to this show, this is in my book, Medicinal Shrubs and Vines of the American South. You want to get a copy of it, that's great. If you know a doctor, you know a pharmacist, you know a pharmaceutical researcher, you know somebody who could actually take this information and do with it what God intended, please do so. I frankly think this is a plant that could change the world for the better. And it is one of our most beautiful wildflowers. It is the state flower of South Carolina. You probably have some growing near you right now. I would strongly suggest doing research into this plant. Again, I am not going to recommend its use in any way, shape, or form, but I would strongly suggest doing research into this plant. It has been, I won't say a lifesaver for me, but I mean, when the pain was so intense that I could not sleep, that I was such intense pain from that rotten tooth that eventually had to be pulled. If you don't remember the story, when I was a kid, it's the only tooth I ever had filled. It was just crazy drilled out for no apparent reason. The dentist was just really ripping my mother off, essentially. I mean, I wasn't more than 7, 8 years old. I couldn't have had a cavity that bad, I drilled out the entire tooth, filled it, did a really bad job of the filling. Eventually the filling cracked, broke, fell out. I thought, okay, no big deal. The tooth is still intact. I had no idea that infection had gotten into the root and was essentially hollowing out the bone, my jaw, under the tooth, until suddenly one day I just spiked a fever. The whole thing swelled up, and I was in agonizing pain. And it was a holiday. It was, I think, Easter. There was no way I could get in to see a doctor. There was no way anybody was going to be able to treat this for it. Actually, because I finally got an appointment, it had to be rescheduled, then come in for an exam. Okay, we're going to set you up for that. Reschedule. It ended up being like 3 months before that tooth was finally pulled. I mean, by that time, there was no way the tooth could be saved. It was, just totally shot. And I had a serious infection in my jaw that was just like almost debilitating for 3-4 months. Gelsemium, I don't know what I would have done without that, and Oragel. Oragel is, the topical thing you can put on there that numbs things out. But, I mean, that was really some of the most intense pain I've ever had. That, they call it neurofacial pain. It's really, really bad. It's like a migraine sitting in your jaw. And, so for me, I keep it as an option. Definitely not something I use recklessly, and definitely not something I want to rely on, and definitely not something I want to use but maybe every 10 years when I absolutely need it. But for me, I'm glad to know it's on hand and I can use it when I definitely have to have it. If I broke a leg, and couldn't get to a doctor for a few days, I would use it. I mean, it's that kind of intense pain. It's not like taking an aspirin. And, to me, I think it's a useful plant. You make your own decision. You make your own judgment. And y'all, I will talk to you next week.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.